All right. Hey, three, two, one. This is the Sustainiacs. I am Michael Vincent, and I have the distinct pleasure of having a bell ringer in the studio today. Zvi Schreiber, CEO at Freightos. You're the founder, no?
I am. Yep.
All right. I mean, and you've been around actually about 10 years, but you just recently rang the bell, right? How was that? Congratulations.
Yeah, just 6 weeks ago. Yeah, it was a fun ceremony for sure. Now we've got to get used to being a public company and we're
Yeah.
just gearing up for our first quarterly results and earnings calls, and yeah, so lots of exciting new things to get used to.
It is, yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Let me ask you this: Is it like because I've been around, and hit like seed rounds and then Series A's and stuff like that, right? Is it just like is it like everybody thinks, hey, this is exciting? I rang the bell, man, I've made it, or is it like you've suddenly realized as an entrepreneur now the business really starts?
Oh, yeah, definitely the latter. I mean, well, I don't want to say now it really starts because we've been working for a decade and
Yeah,
making some progress, but I'm under no illusion that this is success. This is a milestone along
right.
the way. We're still a relatively young, relatively small for a public company,
Yeah.
and we're making a lot of progress in digitalizing the freight industry. But still, 99% of the industry is still offline. So even though we're
Which
proud,
is amazing. That is amazing to me, Zvi. Is that right? Is that right? 99% of the industry is still offline. Is that like shippers or
yeah.
like the conglomeration of carriers and capacity?
Well, almost in any sector you look, let's say the area where we've made the most progress is airline bookings. So that's really been our best performer. Electronic booking
Yeah.
for airlines have grown 100x since in the last 2 years on our platform. Freightos owns a platform called Web Cargo, which connects the thousands of forwarders to dozens of airlines, and it's by far the biggest electronic booking platform for air
Yeah,
cargo.
yeah. Let's do that, Zvi. Let's back up just a second and
Oh,
let's do that. Give everybody the elevator pitch on Freightos because I was just so excited to talk to you about ringing the bell and what you guys are doing there that I forget that the audience doesn't have the exact same knowledge that you and I do.
okay, sure,
So
yeah.
please.
Um, yeah, Freightos is the digital platform for international freight. So, as you know, international trade, global trade is a huge part of the world economy. 90% of the products that we buy in the US or in the West are imported. I'm seeing all the nice things behind you there. I'm sure most of those
I
musical
think the
instruments.
only thing that's not imported there is my Telecaster right here. That is an American Telecaster.
Okay, nice. Your equipment, your clothes, your computer that you're on, they're all imported. So it's a
Sure.
huge part of the world economy. And of course, what makes import possible is international shipping, ocean, air, to some extent, rail and truck, but the long haul is mostly ocean and air. And it's just an industry that got forgotten in the 20th century. It's by far almost all bookings are done manually. It can take 2 or 3 days, even today, to get a price quote. Price quotes are normally non-binding. So there's always an asterisk subject to rate increase. The transit time is just an estimate. Nothing's binding. So,
Yep.
so think of us, if you have to sum it up in one sentence, like Booking.com for goods, for international shipping. So just like passenger travel became much, much easier and cheaper and more transparent about 25 years ago when electronic booking came on. So we're doing the same for freight, just making it digital, instant, transparent.
So,
And
so let me ask you this for the people that are watching this, right? So, because I'm importing um, machinery, et cetera, from South Africa. We can get into that some other day for what I'm doing at OPT at Ocean Plastic Technologies. Can I Can I go to Freightos and coordinate that? And it's a much easier process than what I'm doing right now, dealing with a forwarder in Durban, South Africa, and people here and going through all that type of stuff and waiting 3 days. And then, hey, your shipment's booked on this vessel. Well, wait a minute, it got rolled for 5 more days or whatever it happens to be. And maybe it's going to be a 28-day transit, but now it's 45 and that type of stuff.
well, to some extent, yes. There's no miracle cures, and we're not a freight forwarder, so we're not going to ship your goods from South Africa.
Got you.
But we will. You can go to freightos.com and see who are the different providers who can ship it from South Africa. You can see their reputation, like we're used to in other industries. You can see reviews from other customers. You can see
Ah,
actual data for what their real transit, not what they say their transit time is, but what it's been historically. You
okay.
can see an instant binding price. I bet you were back and forth a bit till they gave you a price,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, even after everything's said and done, you go back and forth a little
and
bit
then it's
because
still
there's all
not
these
binding,
other.
right? They'll tell you afterwards, oh, there was a price increase. So,
I don't
yeah,
think there's a single shipping contract in my life that is actually finalized yet. It's just we've agreed that for now it's okay.
right. So yes, so we can solve a lot of those problems. You can get an instant price quote from multiple vendors. You can see real data on their performance. The price is binding, with some exceptions if the weight changes, but in reasonable cases, the price is binding.
Yeah.
And you can track and trace your shipment on our site. So we can give you a much better experience. It doesn't mean it's perfect. There can still be delays or issues, but by giving you instant prices, instant choice, and real data about real transit times and real customer service, we can definitely make that much smoother.
Yeah,
But
no,
the
it's
other half,
beautiful because if I've got suppliers and coordinating goods and production lines and all this other kind of stuff, I need to know if something's traveling faster. Thank God if it is, but sometimes that doesn't help my production team if things arrive too fast, obviously. And is it on time or not? I can adjust my schedules, my shipping, other orders, et cetera, and coordinate it so that I have the most efficient running supply chain and, I guess, in transit inventory as well. Right?
yeah. Now, the other half of what we do are a subsidiary which is called Web Cargo. So Web Cargo is then helping the freight forwarder to book with the carriers in an instant, transparent way. And particularly in air, that's what I referenced earlier. That's now got very big scale. We do thousands of bookings a day, where the forwarders book with the airlines completely electronically. With ocean, it's just getting started. But even in air, where we're by far the biggest digital platform and it's grown incredibly fast, it's still between 1% and 2%. And still you've got,
Wow.
98, 99% of air bookings are still being booked by phone and email by human beings. But the
That's
good thing with,
unbelievable.
at least with the air cargo, is it's growing so fast, you just have to draw the line a couple of years forward and it will all be electronic.
Uh, and
Oceans,
why would Zvi? What is your opinion on why that is? Why is one adopting it so much faster than the other?
um, look, I think a couple of reasons. First of all, air cargo is an urgent product.
Yeah,
So if you're shipping your stuff by ocean, it's going to take whatever. It's going to take 30 days. If you
yeah.
waste a day or two on getting a price quote, yes, it's annoying, but still, it's a day or two. For 30 days, it's not a huge difference in the end to the overall experience. It's just annoying. But if you're paying top dollar to ship something by air and you want it to take 3 to 5 days, and then you waste 2 days just getting the price quote and placing the booking, then that's insane. So air just being an urgent product, the digitalization is even more important. Another factor is that the air market is somehow more competitive, and the ocean market is sort of dominated by the top five carriers. The top ocean liner has more than 20% market share. The top airline, which is Qatar Airways, has more like 6%.
Wow,
So it's more
gotcha.
fragmented and more competitive. That might be an aspect.
Let me give you a fun fact. In 1999, I started what we considered to be the first expedited and guaranteed ocean shipping service. We ran overnight guaranteed delivery to the Bahamas from Riviera Beach, Florida.
Nice, nice. I wish more ocean carriers had copied your example. And,
Yeah, I was with Tropical Shipping at the time. I ran the container freight stations for a number of years there throughout the Caribbean and Caribbean
well, that
and
was an important innovation, which is still all too rare 20 years later.
that business was interesting because it was founded by a gentleman named Rick Morrell, who was he owned a company called Birdsall Construction in the Bahamas. It was a Bahamian-owned company, Tropical Shipping at the time, and he grew up in the islands, and so he built the whole company around the fact that he was the lifeline for those islands. Right, if the United States sneezes, the Caribbean gets the flu, right, type of thing. And so he built it very much like that. But hey, you know what? I saw you on Fox News and heard the talks at Manifest and so on, talking about the future of supply chain and where we're at now and how we got to this particular point. And I want to kind of have that conversation, but if you don't mind, from a little bit of a different perspective than most people take this, right? the show and what I'm trying to do here is I've got 35 years in logistics, right? And now my big passion is really sustainability. And from two different angles, if we could talk about it a bit, from sustainability in the sense of reliability of your supply chain, really the core type of value and benefits that Freightos brings to companies and shippers, importers, exporters, but also from the perspective of how can you impact the green or environmental side of sustainability in your supply chains, and how does the movement of the world and everybody else towards sustainability, how is that going to impact supply chains, whether it's from where you're sourcing or how it moves, that type of stuff. But of course, from a perspective of how does the services of Freightos and how would those impact those, and even other services, whatever. But that's kind of that's the theme that I'd like to go for, if that's fine with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sustainability is a huge issue for the world, obviously, and for our industry. Um, the OECD estimates that freight is responsible for 2 gigatons of CO2 emissions a year, 2 billion tons.
Yeah,
And worse, they estimate that by 2050, that's going to quadruple to 8 gigatons. So
which
freight is
is amazing. I mean, that is amazing. I'm going after plastic. I mean, not going after plastics, but we solving the logistics problems for recycling plastics, right? To
yeah,
make it
yeah.
easier and better and that type of stuff. And the estimate there is that it'll hit 50 gigatons by 2050.
The
Can
whole
you
plastic
believe that?
industry.
Plastic,
Yeah, yeah,
from the production all the way through its life cycle into, because you're talking about incineration afterwards, right?
yeah,
You don't
yeah,
burn
yeah,
ships when they're
yeah,
done, right? So their
yeah.
carbon footprint is really the operation and the construction thereof, right?
Right. Well, and yeah, and the operate the fuel, the bunker that they burn, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
No, but it's a big, this industry is a big emitter, maybe not as big as plastics based on what you're saying, but it's still a big emitter. And it's there's some untractable problems, I mean, roads, the cars are going to becoming electrified at a reasonable pace. Ships can't really be electrified because they're on the ocean for weeks, and there's no stops to stop and recharge batteries. So you can't, at least you can't, batteries for ships are not practical, and batteries for planes are not practical because they're too heavy. Planes are very, very sensitive to weight because they've got to float in the air.
yeah.
So there's some intractable, some of the solutions that are working on the road are not really suitable for air or ocean for different reasons.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different problem, isn't it? I mean, we've got to look for alternative fuels. I would guess solar. I mean, it just seems to me like you couldn't get the amperage up enough to power, a 20,000 TEU Regina Maersk or something like that, right?
No, you could. You're right. I don't think you could. I don't think you could power a ship on solar panels, but you could use. You could use solar panels to do electrolysis and produce hydrogen, and then store the energy in hydrogen, and then power your ship in hydrogen, or a
Well,
plane.
that's interesting. Yes,
That's very
because
realistic.
yeah, there's been some advancements in some universities out of Indonesia and also in China about electrolysis of seawater directly into hydrogen that have been quite promising, right? I mean, it's the power consumption and the greenness of the production of hydrogen that is the issue right now, right?
Right,
It's not
right. So exactly. So you can't really generate green energy on the ship, but you can generate green energy somewhere else and then transfer it to the ship in either in a
right.
sustainable, sort of hydrocarbon fuel or in hydrogen, which is probably even better.
Right, right. So let me ask you this: what was kind of, so you guys have been around for, I mean, many, right? Like, I mean,
11
like
years.
2010 or something like that. Is that right?
2012.
2012. Okay, so I knew it was over a decade, right? So it's just over a decade, and so a lot has changed over a decade, right? So, I mean, in 2012, what was the catalyst that brought you into existence? And then what have you kind of seen as we move forward? And then obviously this like hockey stick of advancement or awareness that occurred starting in the winter of 2020, which we all know what happened then, right? Um, what has been lagging? What has been going out? Why the dragging of the feet to make the efficiencies happen in this particular part of logistics?
I don't know, Michael. That's a great question. Now, I've only, you've been in the industry longer than me, so I should ask you that question.
I
I
think I think it's a lot like plastics. My personal opinion is because it's always been that way, and there was nobody pushing it, and no obvious catalyst that said, "Wait a minute, this doesn't work anymore." We that pandemic had to happen in order for us to have this really really big kind of acceptance and realization that we need to move this thing forward. Right?
Well, interestingly for us, if I talk about air cargo again, where the digital revolution, has significant momentum now, it actually happened before COVID.
Yeah.
We our very first, but when I started in 2012, I didn't know it would take this long. But we got our very first API, in other words, electronic connection from an airline, was Lufthansa in 2018.
Oh, nice.
Um, and then in 2019, we got IAG Group, which is best known for British Airways, and Air France KLM. And then going into 2000, before anyone had heard of COVID, we had a pipeline of Etihad and a few others. So even before COVID, we knew that 2020 would be the year that we got critical mass of airlines to start,
Oh, okay.
electronic booking. So that was happening anyway. Certainly, COVID came and gave it an extra push. But that was happening. 2020 was anyway going to be the year where electronic bookings took off, if you'll excuse the pun. So, but the question is, and I always sort of ask the airlines this, and I've never got an answer. Why 2020? When take American Airlines for example, who joined our platform in 2012, 2022. Sorry. Do you know when they started some kind of electronic booking for passengers? It's a pop quiz question for you.
Oh, wow. Pop quiz, electronic booking for
Not web, just any kind of electronic,
any kind. Wow,
any
it
kind of
was.
computerized booking.
It's got to be early '90s, I would guess, probably
1963.
1963. Wow,
1963. Everyone, I ask it as a pop quiz question, not to catch you out, but because nobody would imagine that, right?
I had no clue. I had no
Correct.
clue.
Yeah, most people don't. I didn't either. Till I looked up. They started a system which is still around. It's now called. It was spun off. It's called Sabre. Saber's still around, and then there's the European.
Well, that was kind of the death of the travel agent, wasn't it?
Well, so this was, in those days, it was still for many, many years afterwards, it had to be a travel agent. But in those
Yeah.
days, if you were a travel agent with a big enough IBM mainframe in 1963, you could book a passenger electronically onto American Airlines. And if you wanted
Yeah.
to book
This
cargo onto,
this wasn't big enough back then.
no, yeah, you had to have a big computer, but big mainframe. But if you wanted to book cargo electronically, then you had to wait till last year, 2022. So there was the industry lagged. There was a 60-year lag in a way between the digitization of passenger, at least the first basic
You wait.
beginnings
You couldn't digitally book freight on an airline until last year.
on that particular airline, but till
Oh,
2018
okay.
was the very first. Yeah, so till
Okay.
2018, Lufthansa was the very first, but it only in the
2018.
last 2018. Yeah.
Wow.
It only started in the last 5 years, and it only got any kind of scale in the last 2 or 3 years. So it's very, very new. But now it's growing really fast. So finally, that's happening. Why did it happen only in the 2020s and not in the 1990s like passenger? I do not know.
Wow,
Um,
that's amazing. So why do you think it was this realization? Because it seemed like it sat there, like you said, for almost 50 years, and then all of a sudden people start going boom, 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 and not to take away from your efforts, because people don't realize or don't know what they don't know until somebody tells them what they don't know, right? And they go, oh wow, you put the ham between the layers of bread. I
right.
get it, right? And then it becomes an obvious thing. And to me, this is one of those obvious things. What do you attribute to it? Like all of a sudden, boom, this is it, and it occurred before COVID would have lit it on fire.
Yeah, don't know.
Um,
I mean,
I mean, efficiencies are so obvious to me in my brain to have such an ability to do this. You would have thought somebody to come up with this surely earlier, right? Especially since they did it with passengers.
look, I think in airlines the problem is the passengers. The problem is that 90% of their revenue is, roughly, is from passengers.
Yeah.
The IT department is always focused on passengers. The legal department's always focused on passengers.
Sure.
And cargo is sort of an afterthought. That all changed during COVID, but I think that's part of the issue. But then again, ocean liners who only do freight, they've also been extremely slow to create any kind of API, any kind of electronic connection. So
Yeah.
So but anyway, I don't spend too much time philosophizing about why it didn't happen. Finally, it's happening, and we put all of our
You've got
energy into
yeah,
moving it forward.
you've got more important things to worry about, right? Than why? Let's see, why did cargo become belly cargo in the air industry, but not hull cargo in the cruise industry?
Right.
Got it.
That's a good
That's a
one.
totally stupid and different conversation right there. But so the potential for all this efficiency is huge, especially from a sustainability impact as well, right? The digitization
Yes.
of air cargo, right? I mean, the efficiency that you can pull out and get into your, like we said before, your traveling or in transit inventory, your production, your I remember talking about drivers breaking into the warehouses at Chicago O'Hare up in in Bensonville, Illinois, to get their cargo, right, stealing their own cargo,
Oh, really?
which was
um,
insane.
yeah. So, I mean, air cargo is again a good example because outside of COVID, air cargo holds are on average 50% full. So you could ship twice as much cargo with almost the same carbon footprint. When you add more cargo to a aircraft, which is anyway flying, it has a very slight effect on the fuel because the extra
Sure,
weight, very slight. Basically the most of that fuel is being burnt anyway. So if you and this happened to passengers, by the way, when passenger travel went online, many of us remember this. The planes became fuller,
sure.
and the carbon footprint per passenger actually went down because they were better at filling the planes.
Yeah, cube utilization was better,
Yeah.
basically.
So the same can happen with cargo. The digital booking that Freightos is doing with web cargo or others will help to utilize the capacity of the planes better, and that's good for sustainability for sure.
So when you look at the sustainability of it, so we're talking about emissions there. So let's talk quickly about the sustainability as we talk about the other than China shoring, if you will, right? Near shoring, Indo-Pacific shoring, whatever you want to call it. Are
Yeah.
you seeing significant moves in that? Because there's obviously an effort, and there was an effort, and it started really with in the United States, anyways. It started with Trump and his trade war that he started, which impacted the industry, the logistics and supply chain industry, pretty greatly. People forget how crazy it was at the end of 2018, going into 2019 there for a little
Well,
bit. But so
let's
how does
pause
that
there for a
impact
second.
international?
Suddenly, drove the industry a little bit crazy with these tariffs suddenly appearing and
Sure.
disappearing. But the trade deficit with China did not reduce during the Trump years.
No, it certainly didn't.
So that was just, yes, a lot of disruption, but it didn't actually achieve the stated goal in any way. I see an increase periodically. There's a big increase in talk about nearshoring and
Sure.
domestic production. I'm not seeing that happening in any significant way, though.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's a lot of talk about it, and you see a lot of reports of, oh, this industry is moving out of China. Now they're making it in Indonesia, and they're making it, where it has to be Vietnam, South Korea,
Yeah,
Thailand,
moving around Asia. Yeah,
etc. But then you see the imports and what is going on from the U.S. from China. You don't see any real
correct,
significant change.
correct. And also, if you're manufacturing, I mean, some of the low tech stuff like garments have long ago moved to Bangladesh and other places, but it's still
Yeah,
Asia. So we're still shipping it across the Pacific to the
yeah,
West. Um, but yeah, I mean, in electronics, the supply chain is so deep in China. You can set up a electronics assembly in the United States, but then you're going to ship all the components from South China, uh, and I'm not
good
sure
point.
that you save all that much in sustainability.
Yeah, solid point. That's a solid point. And maybe I mean it's a delayed reaction. You can't just say boom and start manufacturing chips and shipping chips and manufacturing equipment and stuff like that and have it set up in a heartbeat, right? A
Ah,
chip
look,
manufacturing.
I mean, this laptop here must have thousands of components, and it's got sub-assemblies and sub-assemblies, and there's a whole supply chain. I saw this for myself. In my previous job, I was managing an electronic company, and we manufactured in Shenzhen. And you drive up and down the road there, and you've got you've got all the suppliers, of all the
Yeah.
motherboards and the chipsets and the plastic molds. Everything's there. And we tried at one point because the labor got expensive. We tried to move the assembly to somewhere in Southeast Asia, and we very quickly saw it wasn't going to save us anything because we have to bring all the components from China anyway. So I
Yeah, it
think
didn't.
global trade is here to stay pretty much.
Yeah, it is. So okay, so I mean, and I get that, I'm seeing the exact same stuff in the data. When you dig and look for where is the actual impact, you really don't start to see much of it in reality. What about the sustainability movement outside of the supply chain, right? So, from legislation and corporations, you got EPR legislation that's going on, and all these, Vision 20. Everybody's got a Vision 2040 or Vision 2050, and getting rid of electric cars, etc. That changes supply chains. Do you see that having an impact, or do you look towards that to kind of try and plan how's that's going? In other words, the haves and have-nots are going to change, right, over the next 15, 20 years, because we're going to use different materials and source differently, et cetera. Do you see that having an impact, and what should people really be kind of looking for?
Look, I can tell you our view at Freightos because we don't ship anything. We're not a carrier. We're not a freight forwarder. We're a
Right.
booking platform. So our job we see is to provide transparency into particularly carbon footprint, which is the most urgent issue. So we do have a carbon footprint estimator, and every time we give you options of where you want to book, whether it's an importer and exporter booking with a forwarder or a forwarder booking with an airline, we give you an estimate of the carbon footprint, and that can help your reporting if you're obliged by the SEC or by others to report on your carbon footprint. We give you the data for that. If you want to make a choice based on lower carbon footprint, we give you the data for that. As much as a carbon estimator can go, there are some. If you want, we can go into it. There are some big question marks about how to estimate carbon footprints. That's a whole complicated topic. But
Yeah.
we at least do our best to provide that transparency and let people factor that into their reporting or into their decision making, if they like. Now, if you ask me, taking a step back, we're doing that because that's what the industry wants and it has some value.
Yeah.
What would really have an impact would be a global carbon tax. That would be the real way to reduce carbon emissions.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Interesting. Yeah.
and because these allocation, it's too complicated to. In the end, when you give an importer two options and one's cheaper and one's got a lower carbon footprint, 9 times out of 10, if not more, they take the cheaper one. But if you actually factored it in with a carbon tax, then it would be the same. The cheaper one would also be the one with a lower carbon footprint because of the
Yeah.
carbon tax. So Sweden has done that very effectively, by the way, and I think that's the real way to deal with it. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
what the industry wants is carbon footprint estimates, which we absolutely provide.
Yeah. And then people have them for whatever reason it happens to be. I don't know. But I agree with you. I mean, it's still so new of a kind of a thought, as sophisticated as it is to calculate it. It still has its issues, and will still continue to develop as to what it actually is. Right. I mean, there's all kinds of situations like that where people are trying to certify ocean bound plastic versus ocean plastic versus this, and there is no law, there is no actual homogenous way to calculate that. Everybody's got their own way to do it, and hopefully it stands up in a court of law against a greenwashing lawsuit.
Right.
And that's really all it is manufacturers like, oh, okay, you're willing to sit up with your data, then I'll hire you to certify this stuff so you can go fight this stuff
Well, the
in the
European
law.
Union has created a standard for kind of a standard, at least a standard framework. Let's say I don't want
Right.
to say for how to estimate carbon emissions from freight. There's still some question marks. It doesn't standardize everything, but it does give a standard framework. It creates some bizarre ironies as it happens. Interesting question. Is it more green to put your cargo on the lower deck of a passenger plane or on a freighter plane?
Hmm.
So I would say it's far more efficient to put it on a passenger plane because that passenger plane is flying anyway. It's flying. The commercial reason why it flies is the passengers. If there's no cargo, it's going to fly anyway.
Right.
And you're adding the cargo has very little impacts on the carbon footprint because that plane's flying anyway, and just the extra weight, there's only a marginal impact. But a freighter is flying, exclusively for freight, and if you weren't sending freight, then that plane would stay on the ground and save a lot of carbon. So I think it's a lot greener if you have the choice to put your cargo on a passenger plane. But the European standard, the way it's worded, actually creates the opposite effect and gives you a much higher carbon footprint if you put it on a passenger plane.
No, okay, I'll have to look into how that calculation is because
I'll tell you very
that
briefly if you're interested.
okay. Yeah, I'd love to hear it because that's the type of nugget that really keeps my mind awake at night.
Well, I think that this one is quite an interesting irony where the standard gets it wrong. So the European a passenger plane flies. It's got 100 passengers and it's got a let's say it's got 100 passengers and 10 tons of cargo underneath.
Okay.
So and it burns X amount of fuel. So the European Union says, okay, let's take all of that carbon emission from the flight, and we need to allocate how much of it goes to passengers, how much of it goes to cargo. So they're going to say, well, okay, 100. They're going to do it. But they say do it by weight, not by revenue or something, but by weight. Okay, so the 100
Okay.
passengers weigh, maybe I don't know, what's an average? 80 kilo, let's say 200 pounds, right? So you've got something like 8,000 kilos or 20,000 pounds of passengers. Their actual
Okay.
weight of their bodies, right? And the cargo is 10 tons, or
Okay.
or 20. What's that? 22,000 pounds.
Yeah, 22,000
For
pounds.
the Americans, yeah. So the it actually weighs more. So they will say, okay, most of that emission is going on the cargo based on weight. And so the passengers get a free ride. Their footprint is much lower than it really. But if you ask the airline, why is the flight flying? I mean, 95% of the revenue is the passengers. They're flying it for the passengers. Then they made an extra few bucks by putting something in the belly. So commercially, that plane is flying. The reason they're burning all that fuel is for the passengers, primarily, by far. But the European standard puts it all on the cargo, so the passengers get a free ride with a much lower footprint than they really have. And the cargo gets penalized as if half of the fuel was being burned for the cargo. And therefore, it creates an irony where actually somebody who's looking at the cargo emission will say, okay, let's put my cargo on a freighter plane, and so where the whole thing is full of freight, so the footprint per kilo is much less.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of a case where just an interesting example where they're actually driving.
No, Zvi, it makes total sense, and I'm in my brain. I'm thinking to myself of an issue that happened to me early in my career in less than truckload, and basically cutting out in my satellite terminals better than 80% of the dock hours at night because we were spending all this time and money moving freight and putting it onto a truck and packing them high and tight when we were reducing our number of trips by maybe 5%. It wasn't saving us anything. It was actually cheaper. And had we been measuring carbon footprint in the 80s, which we weren't, because you could still smoke on an airplane, by the way. The footprint of carbon would have been so much farther worse running all those dock hours with diesel powered forklifts. Yes, diesel powered forklifts,
right.
Than actually just running 10% more loads into Akron, Ohio, out of central Pennsylvania, et cetera. So yeah, no, I get it. It's the same thing. It's what's the intention? You got to look at the intention of that flight. Was it created to move that cargo, or was it moving anyways? And I agree with you. Yeah, that's kind of. It's kind of screwed up. What is? I know you got to go pretty quick here.
Yeah.
What's next for Freightos now that you rang the bell, my friend? What's the next brass ring? What's going on?
Well, look, honestly, mainly we have to scale what we've done. We've got
Yeah.
Freightos.com where importers and exporters can compare prices and book. We've got Web Cargo where the freight forwarders can compare prices of the carriers and book. We're scaling also our payments. We're scaling our data business. So we have the FBX index, the Freightos Baltic Index is the leading index, like a Dow Jones index, for shipping prices. And FAX, the Freightos Air Index, is becoming the leading index for air cargo prices. So our index business is growing. Other than that, it's really, like I said, if we're still doing with digitized 1%, so just 100 times more of the same,
Yeah, you've got another 99% of that blue ocean to go grab, don't you?
Exactly.
Hey, congratulations on a success so far. And looking forward to watch you guys grow and disrupt, or not disrupt, but
It's,
make the industry more efficient. And next time I'm going booking my next shipments from South Africa, I'm coming to you guys. I can't believe I haven't already, and I should have.
sounds good.
I'm going to check it out and certainly use it. Zvi, Freightos.com, is that where they go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Everybody check out Freightos.com. Zvi, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have you on again, my friends. This has been the Sustainiacs. Peace and love.
Thanks, Michael.